Thanks indeed for staying with us. The program is still this morning on ITV. We are broadcasting from your darling station, Independent Television, located at the hilltop of Umpape Hills in the FCT, as well as our Benin station that is also a part of the ITV, our global family. Well, we would be now looking at the issue of the renewed farmers' headers dispute, the one that have largely been dominating discourse in recent days. Yeah, this time around, it's not about Benue, Adamawa, or Nasarawa State, but it is largely coming. The heat is coming from the southwest, particularly Oyo and Ondo State, where we're getting all of those heat, all of those tension, and whatever the headers quit notice, and what all of those things here. Well, we'll be discussing now, as we'll get someone who is fast in this field to be joining us via Skype here. He is Professor Edward Philip, a professor emeritus, Horisaki University, Japan, is the professor of history. A very wonderful and lovely morning, Prof.
Thank you. It's late afternoon here, almost evening.
Okay, afternoon in Japan. Thank you very much, Prof. Sometimes that's the time zone and how we have been going through it so much. We hope you understand with us here. Yeah, now, Prof, let's look at the farmers' headers clash. It's a problem now in Nigeria, problem in some Western African countries here. From your own study of the clashes between the farmers and the headers, going through history, can you give us a guide?
Yes, this is a very common problem throughout world history. The Mongols conquered a very wide area through Asia and into Europe as nomadic herders, in their case, horse herders. It's a conflict in the United States history, too. A lot of the Western movies are about the range wars, which were clashes between herders and farmers to see who would settle the land in the West. So it's a common theme throughout world history. It's something that the great historian Ibn Khaldun wrote about it and analyzed at length. And it's also something that the Sultan Muhammad Bello of Sokoto wrote about, and he had a strong position on that during his time as ruler of the Sokoto Caliphate.
Okay, Prof, it's a common thing throughout history. We agree it's a common thing throughout history. But as we stand now, many are getting deeply worried that lives are being lost, properties are being destroyed, many countries are being threatened about this. Has it been so throughout history as well?
Yes, it is. The conflicts in the United States caused the Federal Army to be called out in several of the most famous range wars, as they're called. And it was only solved by the settling of the herders. The cowboys are... Someone in Nigeria once asked me in Hausa, he said, do you still have cowboys even today? And I said, yes, but they don't migrate anymore. Basu Yawo Yanzu. The government has forbidden them to migrate. And in the Sokoto Caliphate, Muhammad Bello also had a strong policy of settling nomads to try to prevent these conflicts.
Okay, if you said the whole thing that you saw in the cowboy community, where formerly, according to you, they were formerly roaming, but now they had to sit down, they had to rest, they had to stay in one place and graze the cattle here. Why has it been difficult for leaders or communities or states to actually believe and abide and embrace the ranching policy, as we have seen in cowboy communities, particularly in Southern America and even in the other parts of America?
Yeah, I don't know why it's been a problem. It hasn't been, I mean, it was a policy of Muhammad Bello's, but I remember I was told by someone from the part of the Sokoto Caliphate that was ruled by his uncle, Abdullahi Danfodio, that Abdullahi didn't share his policy of settling nomads. Apparently a lot of these Fulani who are causing trouble in Nigeria today are from outside of Nigeria and outside of the former Sokoto Caliphate. The Saudis also had a policy of settling nomads to try to end this conflict and get rid of this nomadic herding lifestyle. Both Bello and the Saudi Muslims, the so-called Wahhabis, believe that this nomadism was an un-Islamic lifestyle and should be abandoned in favor of settlement.
Okay, now let's take some analogy which I think you would have understood here. I was privileged about 13, 14 years ago to spend some time in Israel, particularly around the areas after the Dead Sea, towards Eilat and towards the Sinai Peninsula, where we saw the Bedouins actually crisscrossing both countries, and the Bedouins doing their thing. And somehow there have not been really clashes between the Bedouins and the Egyptian authority, or the Bedouins and the Israeli. How come both countries have been able to manage the Bedouins, but somehow in Africa here the cattle rearers is a big problem?
That I don't know, as I'm not really an expert on Israel, and I haven't been there and I haven't studied it. At certain times, clashes become. For example, the Darfur is largely a clash between nomadic peoples and settled peoples. When there's competition over scarce resources, there can be a kind of symbiosis. I mean, settled peoples have things that nomads need. Nomads have things that settled people need. It's a question of, for Bello and others, it's a question of bringing the nomads into the settled society. This is what effectively happened in the United States when the herders were brought into ranches and the land was divided, and they began cooperating with the farmers instead of coming into conflict with them. And that's what Bello was trying to do in the Sokoto Caliphate too.
Okay, if Bello tried to do that in history, but somewhat now we've gone several decades, and that did not metamorphose. Now the question now, some are also asking, is that the issue of nomadic tradition, the issue of nomads going from one place to the other with the cattle in search of pastures, in search of grains and all that, have become ancestral. And some are saying, look, we cannot be changing this culture now. That is good for us to live like this, being that we are nomadic in nature, nomadic in tradition, and nomadic in mental configuration here, that we must remain nomads instead of us to be kept somewhere. Do you share this opinion and this thought, Professor Phillips?
Pulaku, this Fulani self-identity. Well, cultures are always changing. I mean, you can't, there's this idea that I associate with colonialism and colonial anthropology, that Africa is an unchanging essence. The tradition is something that you can't mess with. I love tradition, actually, and the tradition of cowboy music has carried on in the United States, even as these people have been settled. The same with the Fulani. When Bello had the Fulani settled in the Sokoto Caliphate, they kept a lot of their culture, and you have this hybrid House of Fulani culture now, because there are so many Fulani people who settled into the Hausa culture during the 19th century. It's a complicated question, and certainly the traditions of the Fulani have, to a certain extent, survived even as they were integrated into the Hausa society. But obviously all of them haven't been assimilated. You're also having a problem, if I can go back excuse me, to that earlier question about why you're having conflicts now, one problem is that the population is becoming much more dense in general. I mean, just over the past 40 years or so that I've been associated with West Africa, I've seen the population grow enormously and things have become much more crowded. There's much more conflict over resources. This is a factor not only between herders and farmers, but it was a factor in the Zangakataf incident and some of the ongoing conflict in southern Kaduna, as well as in Darfur and other places. You simply haven't got the carrying capacity for the land to easily support both farmers and herders.
Okay, now, Prof, the question we must touch here, and touch very carefully, be very bold to touch, because should we avoid it, the problems will likely persist. Even if the one currently in southwestern Nigeria is addressed, we're going to see, most likelihood, we're going to see it likely rearing its head in some other part in some other days here. The very big question that we'll be asking, if you can give a guide, I haven't gone through it in history, is what should government be doing when it comes to the issue of mental reorientation? That even if we've been used to ranch, to nomadic lifestyle, we've been used to the movement of cattle in search of pastures, particularly in areas where we get greens based on the rainfall, based on the winter, the summer, the dry or the raining season here. How do you think we can work towards changing the culture to get the herders to agree to ranch, or to agree to a grazing area, or to get some persons to also agree that the herders can live and graze in some part of their communities?
That's a good question, and really it's a problem for Nigeria and other African countries to work out for themselves. I can tell you that in the United States, the invention of barbed wire was one of the things that forced the nomads to settle down. Before barbed wire, herds of cattle could simply smash fences and go into farmers' fields to graze. The invention of barbed wire made that much more difficult. Of course, some of the cowboys got wire cutters, farmers got guns, the herders got guns, and as I said, federal troops had to be called out. And again, Bello had a very strong policy of settling Fulani nomads into villages, particularly Ribats, but it wasn't entirely successful. And you still have this herder element that you're going to have to figure out a way to solve this.
Okay, Prof, now, if we must figure out where to solve this, the issue on ground is that it appears is very capital intensive. There is a fear. That means what you said, the population is getting very dense. The population growth in Nigeria is very high, with a high projection in the coming future that it's going to get more higher than what it is today, very likely at the very high speed here. And the urban centers are getting very choked. Even the rural centers are still getting pretty choked. Somewhat the farmland is not as available as it was before, with so many persons dragging and having dispute and litigations over lands here. But the big question is, for now, some persons are already perceiving very strongly that government should do something to help the herders. Some are arguing and disputing that the issue of cattle rearing is a private business and government should not be involved in it. From your perspective, should government be involved in settling the herders in ranches, or be involved in settling the herders in some grazing reserve, or should government just say it's a private business, we are not concerned? What happened and how did it work in the US and in Southern America?
Yeah, that's a good question. When the settlement went on, the land was widely available. That's one of the reasons you had this nomadic herding that started on the Great Plains in North America. And you had a similar thing in South America, excuse me, in Brazil and Argentina. Um, I'm very reluctant to get into the business of offering advice to the Nigerian government about what their policies should be. Let me read, though, from got my book here about Mohammed Bello's rebought policy and his settlement of the Fulani. Let me quote from Mohammed Bello, in fact. The concern of the Sharia to promote community life is well known. Due to this, the jurists have ruled that it is lawful to transfer a foundling excuse me, from the desert to the village and from the latter to the town, but not the opposite. There is no doubt that man is urban, madani, by nature. Human perfection is not reached save through urbanization and civilization. End quote. Bello also wrote to Emir Yakubu Bauchi to tell him that Fulani herders living among non-Muslims should be brought into reboughts, even if this meant giving up their cattle herds and abandoning their grazing grounds. And this was to Bello, and later to the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia, this was a matter of Islamization. Nomadism is to Bello, although not necessarily to his uncle, something that Mohammed Bello thought was un-Islamic. Now, I'm not going to take a position on who are the correct Muslims. I'm not in the business of giving advice to the Nigerian government about what its policy should be either. I can tell you as a historian what Mohammed Bello's policy was of forcing the Fulani herders to settle down and stop roaming the countryside. And something similar was also done in the United States to put
hello, Prof.
Ranches.
What I'm asking you is, there is a school of thought that believe that, like what government does in every other sector of agriculture, in terms of rice production, in terms of tomatoes production, in terms of tuber production, in terms of cocoa and other production, government gets involved in giving intervention funds here and government support farmers. Many are arguing on this part of headers that government should not have a hand in it, or financially. Some are saying government should put money in it to help them ranch and others. From your experience in the United States, was government involved in getting them to settle, whether by giving them financial grant or support or whatever, or should government not put its money in getting these headers settled maybe through little grant or support?
Well, as I mentioned, the federal military was called out to suppress some of these range wars between farmers and herders. So it was definitely federal intervention. Encouragement was given to people who wanted to settle. It's called the Homestead Act. It was passed in 1862. You could get federal land if you lived on it, settled on it, and made improvements in the land, and you lived on it for a certain number of years, then you could claim that land as your own. And this is homestead farming. Now, that was not available for herders. Herders were ranging cattle on federal land and trying to prevent farmers from improving that land so that they could claim it as a homestead farm. That's the situation in the United States. But in the 19th century, I should add. This is the period when most of those old Western movies often with cowboys shooting it out with farmers. I'm not going to vouch for the accuracy of the Western movies, but I think a lot of Nigerians have seen Western cowboy movies.
Okay, Prof. Now, let's now go deeper now. Managing the dispute here. Is it possible, and ever possible, for farmers and herders to coexist mutually? Is it possible for them to coexist mutually and live in the same communities?
Sure. Cattle rearing. Let's take the state of Wisconsin. in the United States. It's nicknamed America's Dairyland, and it's famous for cheese, milk, ice cream, all kinds of dairy products. Some of the farmers raise the cattle, either beef cattle for consumption or dairy cattle for milk and milk products, and they use grain that's grown by other farmers who specialize in growing grain. So there's a symbiotic relationship there between cattle raising farmers and grain raising farmers. It's perfectly possible for farmers to cooperate. Now, that can't happen, obviously, when you have cattle herders invading the land of farmers. They have to be willing to cooperate with each other and exchange things that each other need. And that was not, that really couldn't happen until the cowboys were settled.
Thank you very much for your time here. Professor John Edward Philip, Professor Emeritus, Horisaki University of Japan. He's Professor of History. We thank you for finding time to join us on this program this morning and that afternoon.
My pleasure. Do I have time to plug my book again?
Thank you very much, Prof. Enjoy your afternoon here, but for us in Nigeria here, we're in the morning.
Thank you.
And we're getting set for, the sun is just rising now.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, that has been Professor Emeritus in Horisaki University of Japan, Professor of History, Professor John Edward Philip here, giving us his own thoughts, how it happened even in the Americas, Southern America and some part of Northern America, how it happened between the cowboys and the farming communities. It wasn't so easy, but they had to go through, push it through, and today they've enjoyed it. And farmers and herders can live mutually because they all need each other. The milk you drink, the ice cream you take, the everything you take come from the herders community. The cows you use to bury the chiefs, the skin you wear come from the herders community here. The farmers, the herders as well, know that the food they eat comes from the farming community, so they must live side by side. And he's saying even if they live side by side, the cattle must be ranched, and they must be ranched, and that it happened so in the U.S., and the government was bold enough to look at the cowboys as the farmers, and the times when they had clashes with the cowboys coming down with their guns and shooting, that cowboys have always carried guns. That's what he said, and that's why when you listen to lyrics from Don Williams, from Kenny Rogers, there is always talk about guns in some of their songs, like you don't need to fight to be a man. And several other songs here, cowboys always carry gun. They engage in shooting range, shooting festivals, because they always carry gun to protect their heads from those who rustle cattle when they even clash. So we pray that this time around all will be settled. We pray that government will be bold enough to go through it here and ensure that the cattle are properly assisted, the herders assisted to ranch, while the farmers can go there get manure for their crops. Just be heavily symbiotic. We'll take a break. When we return from the break, the program this morning on ITV will continue.